behaviour offence to cover post-separation abuse, and also extends the offence in regard to disclosing private sexual photographs and films. It also creates a new offence in regard to non-fatal strangulation or suffocation of another person. There is also now a duty for local authorities to provide a statutory domestic abuse perpetrator strategy, and also provide that all eligible homeless victims of domestic abuse automatically have priority need under homeless assistance. There's also a requirement that where a local authority, for reasons connected with domestic abuse, grants a new secure tenancy must grant a new secure tenancy to a social tenant who has previously had a secure tenancy but might have had to have left due to domestic abuse. It also prohibits GPs and other health professionals for charging victims for any supporting letters, and provides a statutory code of practice in regard to immigration work. So what have we done so far? So we've set up our local domestic abuse partnership board. It meets every 2 months, and the board is also set up as I said, the safeguarding partnership priority group, and also is governance for the MARAC function. We're in the process of undertaking a needs assessment and development of the draft domestic abuse strategy. We've also ensured that all homeless applications who approach us fleeing from domestic abuse receive automatic priority need under homeless legislation, and are working with partners in regard to that. There's ongoing discussions with ESTAS, and I'm aware Wendy's in the room with you today, regarding accommodation-based support to victims of domestic abuse. And we've also successfully bid for funding from the Home Office alongside the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioners in regard to developing a perpetrator programme across Shropshire. So that kind of gives you a very much a whistle-stop tour around the domestic abuse bill and the new legislative powers that have come in. I think it's also important today to just talk through some of the services that are available for people that are fleeing domestic abuse, and hence Wendy is in the room. So first off, I wondered if I could just hand over to Bev Hull. So Bev is the interim service manager for mental health and safeguarding in the adult social care team, now the new people director. And I wondered if Bev could just give us some figures for the number of people coming through fleeing domestic abuse within her service.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning. I suppose to put it into context, so in Shropshire we have a county safeguarding operational team, and for some data really from the 1st of April to date, we've had 412 concerns that have come through to that team for safeguarding adults. Out of that 412, 86 have gone on for inquiries, for investigations that have led to further operational input. Now, 37 of those cases are under the category of domestic abuse, and what we have is that 31 of those have experienced domestic abuse within the family home. The other figures have been out in possibly other people's homes and in the community. We also looked at, if we look at the new Act, and it bases itself on behaviours. So although we have domestic abuse, we also include the behaviours would be neglect, cohesive approach. So if we look at what we have at the moment around the other categories, we also have 24 cases that are linked to behaviours that would connect with domestic abuse. So in total, although that we are actively looking at 37 cases of domestic abuse, we are co-working 58 cases. What we know to date is that there is an increase on people who experience domestic abuse are 65 and over, and topped to that. And I think that's some connections to that has been that it has been more apparent when people are receiving care within the home. So other professionals are actually working with the person that is experiencing a form of domestic abuse, and there's still a lot of shame around somebody experiencing domestic abuse, which hinders and stops them moving forward to be able to disclose that and get appropriate support in the community. We work certainly in Shropshire with making safeguarding personal, so we will go along with, we don't make decisions without the person, so we support better outcomes. And a lot of the cases that come through don't go further to a Section 42 inquiry. We work at the concern rate, at the pace of the person that's experiencing domestic abuse. So often we will signpost, because that's what they want, to the services that Wendy manages, so she can actually tell you a bit more about that. And just there's other things just to say within Shropshire. Morrison's have a safe place for people, so their staff are trained. Somebody who has, it's being controlled and may be able to go shopping can actually then sort of go through to a staff member, and that will be supported. There are also public houses within Shropshire called Ask Valerie, and that is open to females that were maybe in the company of a first date and feel quite vulnerable, so they can ask staff to Ask Valerie, and there is a protocol in place. I hope that's given you some information about the work that we do in Shropshire.
That's great. Thanks, Bev. If I could hand over to Wendy now. I know that she's in the room with you, but just to talk about the services and the work of Shropshire Domestic Abuse Services.
Thanks, Laura. Hi. So yeah, thanks, Laura. So I'm Wendy Borman and I manage Shropshire Domestic Abuse Service. Hi, Duncan. We've been the commission service for the past just coming up 5 years now. We're on a contract that comes to an end on the 31st of March next year. What we offer to the community is a raft of support services. We've got accommodation, as the report says, that Laura's provided you with. So we've got safe accommodation in the form of refuge accommodation and dispersed safe houses. Accommodation provision is not just for females, it's also for male victims. We have a 2-bed flat that we always provide for male victims when they need it. When we originally started, we felt that we could have it as a male option if we needed it, but we kept it as it could be either or. But in the last 2 years, we've just kept it ring-fenced specifically for men, because we saw a few more male victims picking up the phone and making contact with us. It still runs on pretty much a 50 to 60% occupancy, so it's not great, but nevertheless, we've decided to carry that and keep it open. Across the rest of our bed spaces, they are for female victims, and whether it's the female or the male victim, they are able to bring their children with them into refuge or safe accommodation. The refuge for, or the accommodation for female victims runs at about 85 to 90% occupancy. We are in the middle of the pandemic. We were at 100% occupancy across all, and we had to open up more accommodation also with the support of Laura's team in housing to accommodate even more people. So in that pandemic moment, they moved and then they stayed, and we needed more accommodation. But on the general, I would say we average 85 to 90% occupancy across our accommodation services. And the main reason for that has been because people that are coming forward now have more complex needs, which I think is what Beverly was referring to as well. They're either older people or they have a mixture of mental health, drugs, alcohol and other complex needs, criminal justice, etc. So we're unable to always accept them into traditional refuge style accommodation, so that traditional communal large refuges that you might imagine. So what we've done as a result of that is Shropshire Domestic Abuse Service sits within Connectors Homes, a housing association registered provider, and we were therefore able to draw down some Homes England funding, and we're in the process of opening up 5 one-bed self-contained units that we will house. We're doing women only initially, so there will be women only in these 5-bed units that have complex needs. So we feel that those people that have been coming through and trying to get into our mainstream accommodation, we're now going to be able to offer them a different offer that's going to be more for them. We're trying to work with partners across drugs and alcohol teams and mental health services to make that a really good offer. So it's not just about the domestic abuse, it's then about their mental health and well-being. What everybody and every organisation has seen coming out of the pandemic is that real spike in mental health needs, and we've seen that massively so across our service. A different kind of support is required for both the children and young people as well as the adults. So we're hoping that we'll be able to offer that, and we hope that opens on 1st of November, but watch this space on that one. Building delays have been quite regular. So that's kind of our accommodation provision. Within the accommodation, we're funded for through the Commission Service for the adult support work. And that support work is not just offering them a safe space, but it's also helping them rebuild their confidence and self-esteem. It's helping them ensure that they've got financial security, that their benefits are in place if necessary, or they're educated, or they get back into employment. It's about helping them move on to secure their own homes and their own tenancies, and learn how to secure them for the rest of their life in a safe way. That's what our funding is for the adult. We have no funding currently from the local authority for children's services, children and young people services, but we have a really small children in need contract, which offers a really small amount of support into refuge for those children and young people. That's certainly a gap. In the community provision, which we would class as our outreach provision, we in Shropshire, we offer to the whole of Shropshire. So anybody living within the Shropshire postcode region that is impacted or affected by domestic abuse is eligible for our support. Male, female, LGBT communities, it's open to absolutely anybody and everybody. That support is very similar to that of the accommodation, as you would imagine. It's about helping them understand what's the situation they've been through, or even that they're living in currently. We don't have to only be working with somebody who's left the abusive relationship. We work with a lot of people that are still in it. And we support people that are unsure whether they wish to leave. And we try and help them. I always say to the team, our job is to help people open their eyes to see the reality of the world that they're living in. It's then their choice to make that informed decision whether they choose to stay in it. If you stay in a domestic abuse relationship, it has consequences, not only for you as an adult, but also for any children that you might have. And we help them understand all of those consequences. But it isn't our job or anybody else's job to tell an adult what to do. It's just our job to make sure that they get a full understanding of their current situation. And as I say, that children in need contract that we have in the community also enables us to do some small work with children. We've just completed a training programme that we are talking to the local authorities education team about, that can go into schools. It's very much mental health focused, very much about understanding the brain, and it's a really good 6-week programme. So we're going to trial that in a school in the Oswestry area, and then hopefully get some evidence that education within the local authority might want to roll that out, because that's an excellent programme. In terms of, I think that's, yeah. So let's say we do support all. It's attending court cases, it's attending conferences, child protection conferences, it's supporting them with adult mental health or safeguarding. And we also deliver empowerment and education programmes. That's the other part I wanted to say, sorry. So we run different programmes. Traditionally, people, when they think of domestic abuse, if they've been in and around for a while, will always think of freedom. There are many, many other programmes, and we deliver lots of different programmes. And I'm also in the process of being trained to deliver a new programme called Phoenix, which is much more tailored to all genders and open to all. And we're also in the process of talking to an organisation in Wales who have a specific male victim programme, and looking to see whether through new funding we'd be able to pay to bring that into Shropshire, because we know that you have to take a slightly different approach to male victims. They don't necessarily want the same as what female victims want, and they don't necessarily want it in the same way. So the outcomes need to be the same. They don't want it delivered in the same way. So we're working constantly with other agencies to make sure our offer is right. And I guess, you know, in summary, we know it's not perfect. We know we need to do a lot more, but that's where we're at the moment, and we look forward to hearing what the new tender would look like that we might be in an opportunity to bid for. So if you wanted me to talk about the perpetrator side, Laura.
In a sec, I was going to say I'll just do a quick run through of it, and then if you can pick up where ESTAS comes in, Wendy, that would be great.
Sure.
So yeah, so just to before we take any questions, I wanted to just update you on the perpetrator programme. So Shropshire Council, alongside the Police and Crime Commissioner, were able to bid for grant funding from the Home Office. So we were successful with that bid, and both Richmond Fellowship and Shropshire Domestic Abuse Services have been successful in being awarded funding to provide the My Time Perpetrator programme. The programme has also got an element of provision for children and young people, so those that for people that are accessing the perpetrator programme, if there are young people or young children involved with that family, then they will be able to access support as well. So Richmond Fellowship will deliver an evidence-based 18-week domestic abuse perpetrator programme. They'll engage with a total of 72 perpetrators of domestic abuse over the period of time that we have the funding. And their aim is to reduce harm to victims and children, reduce police time, look at the additional needs and vulnerabilities of perpetrators addressed, a reduction in the number of perpetrators of domestic abuse and new and repeat victims coming through, to encourage local change in the response to domestic abuse, reduce the overall levels of domestic abuse in the area, and ensure that victims have that necessary support and long-term support to deal with the situation and incidents that they've been through. As part of that perpetrator programme, there is also a victims element of it, and that's where ESTAS come in. So Wendy, if you're happy to just update on that element, that'd be great.
As Laura said, the part that we're funded to deliver is that victim support, and it's no real different than the support work that we're doing currently through our outreach services, but with an additional element of working alongside the facilitators that are delivering the perpetrator side of the programme. So it's working alongside them so that we gather the information from the current partner or victim of the domestic abuse, and we link with the facilitator of the perpetrator. We discuss what's being said within those programmes week on, week out, so that we can make sure that what the perpetrator is saying here is actually reflective of what's happening. This programme is specifically for male perpetrators, female victims. That is the group that they work with, and so it is very much based on traditional domestic abuse provision and the way it works, but we know that it is predominantly violence against women and girls, so that is why that approach has been taken. And as I say, the main difference from all the other support that we offer is just that additional input to the perpetrator. We make sure that that's done safely. We make sure that what a particular victim says about their perpetrator isn't then handed back to the perpetrator at the next group. The group isn't then designed to say, right, you've said, but you've done, and therefore we're going to address that. It's designed to make the programme be a bit fluid so that it can change and move, knowing that information that they have, but it's not targeting a particular perpetrator and saying your partner has said. We would also be supporting in new partners, so perpetrators that are on the programme, if they start a new relationship, then the partner will also be offered that access to support via our service. We have agreed with Richmond Fellowship that any cases that we're already supporting in regards to the children and young people, even though we're not funded through this programme, that we would continue to offer that support, because it would seem a bit daft to move children to another service just because the funding sits there when we've already got relationships with them. So we will continue to offer that support to those children and young people.
Well, thanks, Wendy. So I'm hoping that alongside the report has given you a good overview really of domestic abuse services across Shropshire. I mean, we're here to take any questions from yourself. Emma Harding from Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership is also here as well, and she leads on domestic abuse for the partnership. So really over to you guys, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, I'll throw it open to members, and I'll leave it to yourselves as who's the best person to pick up the question when it comes. So, has anybody got any questions? Okay, I think Duncan was just slightly in front.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very interesting. I suppose my issues are really about the broader aspects of this very difficult issue. So starting with whether we have a current strategy. I looked up on the website, and from what I could see, and I may have looked in the wrong place, the current Shropshire domestic abuse strategy started in 2020. So if we are coming up to recommissioning a new service in March of next year, I think we need a multi-agency strategy that dovetails in with what the police are doing, because I know the police are very active in this field, and with what health are doing as well. It's a complex cross-departmental issues, and we would need a strategy. So that's one question, if I just a few more. And then also, we've heard a lot about the service we provide to victims, but what is the council doing to challenge acceptability and attitudes that foster abuse in our society? Because a bit like picking up the people who will fall off a cliff. We need to do that. They are in desperate states. But we also need to get up top of the cliff and stop people being pushed off. And so we have a role, I think all councillors can have a role in that. Certainly town councils, and we've got the Mayor of Ossety Town Council here, who's just done a press release on the White Ribbon Authority for the town council there. But what is the council doing to enable the residents of Shropshire to be able to challenge abuse and to get help at the very early stages? Because we all know that if we don't help families where abuse starts to develop, then the consequences downstream for the adults, for the children, for society, and for everybody else can be much, much worse. So that's the second question. Do we have a workplace policy as an employer here? I mean, what do we do with our own staff who are affected by domestic abuse? Is there a policy within Shropshire Council how we support our own staff? And what will we do if one of our staff is a perpetrator of domestic abuse? Do we just say it's not our concern, or have we set out our policy what we would do about that? Because we will, numerically, have both victims and abusers within our workforce, undoubtedly. So have we addressed that issue? I'm concerned that children's services, you do some work on children in need, but you receive no funding, as I understand it, from children's services. I found that quite appalling, given that we know the extent of domestic abuse can wreak havoc with children's lives. We know that taking children into care is an enormously detrimental outcome for them, and enormously costly to us and to society as a whole. So I am asking, why are we not providing a service to families at the stage where we can overcome that abuse to help that abuse to end, rather than waiting till it develops into a crisis? We have to take the children to care, or we have the mothers to flee. I mean, refugees are all very well, but you think it through, you're getting the victims to leave their home. And why is that a good answer? The answer must be that the perpetrator should leave the home, not the victim. And then finally, what are we doing about abusive relationships in school, and what are we doing across the whole council, rather than just in one school, to actually promote healthy relationships and ensure the next generation understand what a good relationship looks like and what to do if their relationships aren't meeting that yardstick. Because if you've been brought up with domestic abuse, how are you to know what is, that's the norm for you, isn't it? And how are we going to challenge that for the future? Sorry for a few questions, but there we are.
Okay, do you want to run through those cases, whoever's appropriate?
Can I, if I kick off, I'm not sure that I can answer all of it, but I'll do as much as I can. So first off, in regard to the strategy, so you're right, there isn't an up-to-date strategy at the moment. It is one of the responsibilities on the local authority as part of the domestic abuse bill, and we are working on it as we speak. There is a needs assessment that needs to be done that feeds into that strategy. So the final strategy is due to be published on the 5th of January, although a draft strategy will be circulated for consultation prior to that. So that is being worked on as we speak. In regard to perpetrators. So I did briefly mention about the perpetrator programme. More than happy to circulate further information in regard to that. I'm also aware that we do have a workplace policy. I'm meeting with HR and the wellbeing team to review that and go through it. So again, that is a piece of work that's ongoing, that is being looked at. In regard to the work around children's services and relationships in schools and the healthy relationship conversation that you brought up. So again, I think there's a recognition, not just from the domestic abuse bill, although when things come into legislation, I think it kind of heightens the knowledge or the interest that people can have in things. A lot of the referrals for the perpetrator programme are going to come through children's services. We're in conversations about actually how that's going to be funded ongoing and how that will be looked at. I absolutely take on board Wendy's comments about the small amount of funding around children's services, and as she says, there is a recontracting, a retendering of that contract due for March 22. As part of the needs analysis that's being undertaken, and as part of the strategy that's being written, the contract and the recontracting of that comes into that same space, and it's all part and parcel of that work really that we're looking at. When the contract was commissioned 3 years ago, we were in a very different space, and we recognise that the definition of domestic abuse has developed, as well as the number and scope of victims. So that is all part and parcel of what's being looked at the moment. I don't know if anybody else wants to sort of come in and comment on any of that as well. Emma?
It was just specifically in relation to the point around children. I'm aware that early help and children's social care colleagues aren't here today, but if they were here, they would. There is a very designated domestic abuse leads within both of those aspects of the local authority, who sit on our multi-agency board and group, and I think they would say that there is work going on within the early help structure and also within children's social care. It's not a commission service, and obviously that is a gap has been identified, but there is absolutely support being provided through early help and targeted early help for children and families, as well as in children's social care as and when that happens. But obviously I just thought it was important to raise that, given that colleagues from children's services aren't actually here. So I didn't know if you wanted to add to that, Laura, unless you missed anything.
No, I think that's great, Emma, thanks. Wendy, was there anything from your point of view?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Emma, because I was going to say that there is targeted early help and there is child protection, but the gap there is that they refer them to us. They refer them to us for us to support them when it's not the basic simple stuff. So I think that's where the gap is that I was highlighting. So yeah, there are a lot of people, and we help and support, train those people on the ground and offer advice and guidance to those people, all through Shropshire Domestic Abuse Service. So yes, it is there, but clearly not. And in terms of your earlier question in regards to how I phrase it as early intervention, getting into the communities, there isn't any work that I'm aware of specifically that goes on. There's a lot of options of work that we could do and training that we could deliver into local communities. We do awareness raising, we go to WIs, we go to church groups, we go wherever anybody wishes to invite us. But of course, that's in addition to the day job, as it were. So that tends to be somebody giving up their time to do that in the evening or at the weekend. And that is about trying to educate. And I know we've looked at different programmes that we could provide and deliver across different local parish councils, but there's a cost attached to that, and it's then really difficult to get that. So it is, I believe it's a gap, and I know Laura and I have talked often about different things where if you move money from the high end, you know, to look to start the early intervention, then the high ends do drop off the cliff, and it's a risk, isn't it? And it's difficult. So I think that for that one, I wanted to pick up, and then the policy. we can support with that in Shropshire Council if they needed a particular employers policy, because obviously we've written one for our own organisation. We're Women's Aid members, so we've got access to what are classed good practice policies. So if the council did need any support with that, then we can do that.
That's great, thanks Wendy. Emma, you've still got your hand up. Was that to come in, or is that yeah?
Yeah, it's just another point I wanted to make. It was just on the earlier question around a strategy. Obviously, the local authority are still doing the strategy as Laura explained, but there is a multi-agency strategic business plan in place for the partnership, which includes actions for the local authority and obviously is a multi-agency plan, which forms part of the strategic priority, which is domestic abuse for the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership. So it's just to provide some assurance to members that there is a plan. It's a multi-agency plan, but it's currently the partnerships plan rather than a specific local authority plan. And what we've agreed is that the strategy that will obviously is being completed by the local authority will weave into that multi-agency plan. So it is all very much being linked together, which is why the decision has been taken to have the local domestic abuse partnership board also as the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership Priority Group, and also the governance group for the multi-agency risk assessment conference.
Thanks, Emma.
Okay, I think that picks up most of the points.
Just one small thing to come back on. I can't find the local authority employment policy on the internet here. If it is there, it's not very visible to people, and I think if our own staff who are affected by these issues and seen in national publicity, I think it should be, it should be clear and highlighted. And I'd pull up the HR policies. There's not a tablet for domestic abuse. If you put a search on domestic abuse policy, nothing comes up. So if there is a staff employment policy, I don't know where it is.
Can we take that away as an action?
Yeah. That's noted. I'll take that as an action to discuss with HR.
Okay, no, that's fine. Can I just bring up, in response to your answer, you're talking about new strategies probably going to come through to Cabinet end of January or sometime just after that. We've got a meeting scheduled for January, so I don't know what the committee feels, whether we could get the strategy to come to our committee, and then we can look at it and we could make some recommendations for it to go to Cabinet if necessary. Would that be something we could look at? Yeah,
I'd be happy with that.
Okay, and I'm just conscious as well, the Act talks about monitoring the effectiveness, monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness. I think perhaps that's one of the things that maybe at some point it could be baked into the strategy somewhere about scrutiny and overview at some point, just a periodic sort of the scrutiny, something like that, so it doesn't fall off the agenda. So, right, I think I had Nick Hignett next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nick Hignett. Just a couple of questions. I was looking down the list of funding from various sources, and I noticed on the BBC Children in Need funding that's due to run out in August 2022. Could we be informed whether this funding is going to be applied for again? Does it have to be applied for every year or two? Because this provides specific targeted support for 5 to 18-year-olds. And I'm concerned that we wouldn't want to lose this, even though it may only be a small amount of funding. Is there an intention to perhaps apply for more funding from children in need? My second question, in my area particularly, we've got a Good Neighbours scheme running, which is actually evolved from the volunteer group that were providing parcels and supplying people's houses during the lockdown. And I think this Good Neighbours group, which would actually be a good first approach for domestic abuse victims, perhaps to contact. I wonder if there are any plans perhaps to send details around to all parish and town councils that could then pass these details on to groups such as the Good Neighbours scheme in our area, perhaps via libraries. I know parish councils were mentioned, that people would come and do talks to parish councils, and I understand that would be in their own time. But perhaps in the first instance, if a detailed information sheet was sent out to all town and parish councils, perhaps they could then pass it on via local members as well, but to parish councillors in particular. Thank you.
Okay, I'll quickly pick up the good neighbour, and then I'll pass on to you, Wendy, in regard to the child in need funding, if that's okay. So I'm looking at Emma virtually through a screen, thinking that actually that's a piece of work that we could do as part of the partnership, given that that's multi-agency.
Yes, we have. During the COVID period, we did actually develop a poster, a domestic abuse poster called, we refer to it as the Love Shouldn't Hurt poster. And we did actually disseminate that and put it on the COVID-19 pages that were available to community groups during that time. But I think that there would be, I think it's something that we need to continue to do and do proactively, so that that message and those details, it is literally a one-page poster with all the key contact information on it. So that is already available, and we can disseminate that again. And I think, as Laura said, that's something that we probably need to continue to do in order to continue to raise that awareness.
Well, thanks, Emma. Wendy, in regard to the child in need funding?
Yeah, and can I just respond to the good neighbourhood one as well? Actually, as we were coming out of lockdown, we recognised that ourselves as a service, that all the community groups had done a lot of work and had come together, and we were saying this is the ideal time to train up, whether we call them ambassadors or whatever we want to do within local groups. And we did a lot of talking, and we approached the Staffordshire Community Foundation for some funding and different things to do that. We've just never been able to make it work, because it's that balance of trying to do the day job and getting money to do additional stuff on top of that, which has been quite tricky. So we absolutely wanted to capitalise on that, and would really relish capitalising on that, because that is how you get that early intervention work done, getting into those groups, training and educating them to understand what their local communities look like, and helping them then pass on the right people. So they're not doing support, because that wouldn't be right or proper for them to do that in their local community, but helping them identify and do. So I think there's a lot that could be done around that, absolutely. In terms of children, that's an application that we made. We're on our second round of 3 years, so 6 years, well, it'll be 6 years come next August when it ceases. We will reapply. We did last time. We will do again. The concern now is, now that it's in the statutory definition, that funding has to be made available to accommodation-based services, and that local authorities have a statutory duty to fund that. Organisations up and down the country are no longer getting or securing children in need funding, because they're saying it's a statutory duty now. So you get with one and it gets taken away by another. So we absolutely will be reapplying for that, and we've just had our Year 5 report back from Children Leading. It's really positive still, so they're very supportive of it. We just might have to change how it looks depending on how the contract comes out, and whether we're successful with that.
Good, Barry is next.
I have been involved with domestic violence since I started on the district council years ago. I haven't heard an awful lot about it in the area. I know there's an awful lot done in Ludlow and regional areas. They have their own groups. It used to be Sue Perry that was in charge. I'm not sure if it's somebody else now. But I must honestly say, talking about early awareness, I found that people don't want to get involved with anything that they think is violent, or, you know, if you're living next door to somebody who's violent and he's knocking his wife around and his children, of course, people just don't want to be involved. Until it gets upset, sometimes that is because my father was very violent. I must also say that over the years, it never leaves you when you're a child, and the neglect of the children so worries me. I wish that you would come forward soon, but women are afraid to say anything. They've lived with these people for such a long time. They don't want to tell people what is going on. They try and keep it as quiet as possible, and they don't want the stigma of what other people might think and where they're living. It's changed, and thank goodness it has over the years. I also feel that I like what's being done now. It's better than what it was. It's a lot better. The police are more involved. I am on the police commissioners, we're talking about domestic violence quite a lot. But I still feel that some women go into taken to other places, and then they get in touch with the partner there, and the partner, if they come from another place, follows them down, like this happened in Ludlow, follows them down to where they live and moves in with them. Now, I'd like to know what happens in those cases. Do you still allow those people to live together, or is it something that has changed? Is it the children who come to suffer still? It's really hard for women to say, look, I'm going to leave this person, I'm going to lose everything I've got. My children are going to have to find a new school and live somewhere else. So, as I said, I'm glad it's changed. But has it changed? Is there still a stigma around it? Is that why other people don't want to get involved? It's very nice, this gentleman says, you know, we'll get to parishes to join in and everything. But really, do they want it? I don't think my farmers would want it.
Firstly, thank you for sharing. If ever you need any support or anybody else in the room, then please do pick up the phone. You know, it doesn't matter how many years ago something happened to you or you were involved in, the support is absolutely there for you. So please never be afraid to pick up the phone, and please repeat that to anybody and everybody that you ever come across. It sticks with you, it stays with you. I have worked in domestic abuse for about 20 years. So has it changed? No, it hasn't. Awareness has changed. It's higher on the agenda. It's publicly out there more. Soap operas, films, they do a lot more of it. They show it a lot more. But the reality is, this is about human behaviour, and human behaviour is always the same. There is a lot based on power and control. There is a lot based on that desire to have control over somebody else. Has that changed? No, I don't think that. I don't think that will ever change. It's our response that needs to change. In terms of, do we allow people to move back in together? As structured domestic abuse service, I have no right to stop. I wouldn't be in a position to not allow. As a registered housing provider, we within Connexus are going for the domestic abuse housing accreditation, the DARPA, to show that we recognise domestic abuse and to put policies in place to actually deal with perpetrators, like I think you referred to in terms, Duncan, in terms of as employees. But we're looking at that from a tenant, let alone employee point of view, about what we can do and how we can do that. DARPA is a national movement, and it's going, it's building up. The local authority themselves could become a registered DARPA organisation to show that they understand domestic abuse when it comes to housing, to try and safeguard from that. The problem is, and it fits with what I said at the beginning, our jobs are to inform and educate. Once you've informed and educated somebody on the risks and the consequences that go along with those risks in terms of to themselves, we always talk about death, we always talk about murder, we always talk about the fact that you could be that next headline, because our job is actually stopping that from happening, and I think we do a pretty good job at it. But that's the reality of the world that they're living in, and the other consequence is their children are not only impacted by it, but risk losing their children. Either they get killed, as we see far too often, or they're removed by children's social care and they're placed in long-term foster care or adopted. So, but our job isn't to tell an adult who, under the Care Act, has capacity to make decisions, because under the Care Act we're allowed to make decisions that aren't good for us, as long as we've got capacity to do so. So it's a real tricky one. I absolutely agree with your sentiment, totally.
How can you get the perpetrators? Stay on the course.
So it's the perpetrator provision that you need to, we could talk about that for hours, which isn't this forum for it, I guess, but it is that work that needs to happen, but in conjunction with educating the victims. And no, we shouldn't be asking them to move into refuge. And yes, the perpetrator refuge provision is something that I've talked about. It's something that at national places they're talking about. Should we be looking at moving perpetrators into refuge type accommodation and educating them, as opposed to moving the woman and the children, or the man and the child into it? It's not going to happen yet, but it's definitely on people's minds and agendas about flipping it, and how do we do that? Just to pick up on the community, that what you're talking about in Ludlow and Bridge North was through our service, is still our service. Sue Perry was a chair for the local forum. There was a South Forum, a Central and a North Forum. They've all disbanded over the few years because it is a voluntary thing, and it's a lot of work. So, but that was also through our service. Sue Perry, yes, she works within our organisation, Connexus, actually, so she is one of our housing officers, which is why she became the chair of it, because she had an interest because of our service within it as well, and a couple of others, Heather Osborne, and other people. But it still could be running, but they stopped because of COVID, so it was running during COVID. But they're the local forums, and we've now got the one central forum. But the support, the work that you were seeing in Ludlow and in Bridge North is what we were delivering across the patch, so it wasn't just in Ludlow and Bridge North. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Emma, did you want to come in?
It was just to highlight to members that it's just to add in terms of Shropshire as a rural area. The National Rural Crime Network have actually conducted a report in July 2019 called Captive and Controlled, which talks about domestic abuse in rural areas. And I think the other thing that's pertinent to consider for Shropshire is the impact and how attitudes, which I think Councillor Hennessy referred to before, the attitudes that societies can inadvertently support domestic abuse without actually knowing it, and that potentially the way in which rural areas are constructed in terms of the communities can inadvertently support the attitudes that support domestic abuse, which means that domestic abuse can last longer in rural areas, and the shame that the councillor referred to is actually possibly more difficult in rural communities because they're very close-knit communities. So I think that is a challenge for us as a partnership, but also as a local authority as part of that partnership, to think about how we can start to explore and tackle and, from a community perspective, address some of those attitudes that underpin those things, so that those feelings of shame can be reduced, because I think it's absolutely right to say those are the reasons why people don't access support, because of the shame and the feeling that they're not going to be supported, not only by services but by their communities. So I think, I'm quite happy to share the link for that report to members if they'd like to have a read of that, along with the poster as I've already referred to, if that would be helpful.
Thanks.
Could I just come back on that? Off the back of that report, we do have that working model of what we wanted to deliver, which is around that, going into those communities, but it is around targeting the different areas in rural. We do have that working model, we've just been unable to get any funding to do it.
Okay, Dan Morris.
Councillor Dan Morris for Burnham. I'd like to thank the speakers for moving the initiative. And one of the points she raised, she spoke about how difficult it is for families to move, and particularly when children are involved. Jumping subjects slightly, I know in the Armed Forces Covenant, we have preferential treatment for people who are housing, for example, and for potentially for schools. So I just wondered, in the same way that what the council does when families are moving away from a violent situation, is there an ability to be able to sort of put these families up the chain effectively for moving, if they're moving houses, or if they're going into schools and that sort of thing? Is there a way of doing that? And do we do it? I just don't know. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll come in if that's okay. I could only part here, I'm afraid. The sound wasn't great. I think, just to clarify, were you talking about support for people that were moving kind of around housing and different housing options?
It's more around those people that come into this system that, picking up on the point of the Armed Forces Covenant, do they receive any additional?
Okay. So from a housing and homeless point of view, as part of the domestic abuse bill, fleeing domestic abuse is now an automatic priority need. So that for us in a homeless service is something that we work closely with, you know, whether it be ESTAS or other support agencies in regard to that individual or that household. But the domestic abuse bill means that people have got automatic priority need. To be honest, prior to that, it wasn't that we gave people automatic priority need because we weren't able to under homeless legislation. We had to do the investigations. But we were particularly supportive, worked very closely with agencies around anybody that was fleeing domestic abuse and coming through to us for accommodation. As well as that, there is the sanctuary programme going on. So this is a programme that housing funds. So we work closely with the police, where we can actually do security measures on properties, so whether that be locks all the way up to a safe room within a property. So it's not always about that individual or that household leaving that property. Sometimes it's around the support that we can put in to enable them to stay and feel safe. So it's both options really that we always look at. But just to clarify that the domestic abuse bill, one of the responsibilities it brought in was that automatic priority need for anyone fleeing domestic abuse.
And so does the same thing apply for schools then as well? So, you know, let's say someone was moving from an area where there's high demand in the school catchment area. How do you make it easier for children of a family that is having to move to move school? Can you sort of, for want of a better phrase, shoehorn them into a school if they're moving into a different area? Is there priority for those sort of cases?
So I don't know the answer to that. I can find out from my education colleagues and I can feed back.
I can pick up on that.
Yeah, that's great, man, thanks.
No, there isn't a priority, not in the same way as there is for housing. When they come into the refuge provision, we're well established and we have good connections with our schools, so they do their utmost to get them in. But when we move and help people that come in from different areas or they move into their own tenancies, then we go through appeals with them to help them. But yeah, there is no actual priority at the moment.
Thanks, Wendy. Bev, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I suppose I just want to say that there is that thread of trying to have continuity for children, and you know, and the parent that has needed to be moved out of the house. But I also would like just to say that through partnership working, so with health or for health working with teenagers, CAMS, there is excuse me, more drive now to look at getting staff trained up in trauma therapy, because it's recognised that you know, trauma is something that will completely impact your life, and whether it is something that happened, you know, 50 years ago or something that's happened last month, we've got to work through that and be able to move on and to give ourselves the choice to make more positive decisions for our future. So that is a real big drive at the moment. So I think that is a positive thing, and really going back also about things of awareness that has changed that can actually support people to move on through having more staff trained in trauma therapy.
Okay, thank you. Anything else got any points of raise? Yeah, Christian Lee.
Yes, Councillor Christian Lee from Bridgenorth. Wendy, you spoke about on occasions having to secure additional housing for victims of domestic abuse. When you have got a shortage of housing, how easy is it to secure additional housing? And if you can't secure additional housing, what actually happens?
Okay, so we specifically secured additional housing during the COVID pandemic. I believe there was the COVID emergency funding that came down from central government. Laura Fisher and I had conversations, do we think we might need additional? And then we worked together to find that. And we, like many agencies and organisations up and down the country, we used student accommodation because it wasn't being used at the time. In terms of in normal life, we don't find additional housing. No, we struggle with that. So that isn't easy. We haven't always needed it in terms of refuge, but this DA Act helps us because not all families want to go in refuge, so it's about looking at the alternatives. Within Connectors Homes, the leadership body that I work under, they are interested in doing more in terms of offering properties that can be move-on accommodation or could be static accommodation to get people into quicker. But there is no easy answer to that.
Anybody else?
Just on the point of admissions to school, I think it's a very important point. My understanding is the council can control admissions to schools. I just have a look at a few, and domestic abuse isn't mentioned. So the top admission is looked after children, or children coming into the care system. The next one tends to be children who've got medical reasons for moving to that school, but I don't think domestic abuse would fit into that because it requires a note from the doctor. The doctor may not have been informed or involved in this. It's not a medical situation. So I wonder if there's a recommendation we should be making as a scrutiny panel that is reviewed to consider whether the council should be, within its admission policy for schools, prioritising children who are having to flee, have to move to that area as a result of fleeing domestic abuse. Because otherwise we're just penalising the children for the actions of a perpetrator, and that sounds dreadful to me. That's the proposal, I suppose, if that's possible.
Okay, well, can I just fold that into, feels like we're reaching the end of our questions at the moment. I've just been taking some notes while we've been doing this. Obviously, I'm taking your point as well, Duncan, I've got picked up on the same thing. That seems to be something that members are interested in. Could I just run through some ideas for some recommendations that we could put forward, and you can tell me whether...
Yeah, I mean, I was using the Army Covenant as an example, but that's also very.
Well, I think, Laura, you were confirming that if somebody was in the situation of being in the forces and in this situation, they'd immediately be priority, which is the highest band for housing as part. Yeah. It doesn't specifically need to be separated out. Okay. Well, where I got to was committee asks that the new domestic abuse strategy is brought to the committee prior to going to cabinet. Also, he considers how overview and scrutiny could be part of the monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of the strategy. Yeah. The committee seek confirmation that a workforce policy is in place at Shropshire Council, and if not, recommends the development of one. That officers give consideration to including a town and parish council and community information / training element within the strategy. And that the committee suggests consideration to what measures, or directly the school admissions policy, could be put in place to assist children who need to move schools as a consequence of domestic abuse. Are those sort of picking up on the points we've been making? Are we, in general, are we happy, or does anyone want to change or dispute any of those? Yeah, sorry, I'll come to my...
I'll just speak loudly. Yeah, I'm vice chair of the Star Housing Board, and obviously the ad hoc various houses, so when we can work a bit closer with Star House, it suggested on a board, well, before I get the board meeting, so we can do a bit more on the domestic violence and see how we can join it and see what we do a bit more on that. I think the Star Housing are very keen to align more with Shropshire Council, but that would be one of the key things that we could do.
So if we can take that as a ask, we're going to ask Star Housing as a committee to consider what more they could do in terms of domestic abuse.
Or the things we're making a certain area where we could have first choice on the door.
Okay. Duncan?
Just a couple of that points, a very good summary, by the way, Rob, but just a couple of that. I think we've got a little bit of confusion around children's services, because I know they're doing work within their own team, but they're also hearing that they're making referrals to you, and it seems that maybe the capacity isn't there, because obviously children are affected by domestic abuse. We need to put some intensive work into them to help them overcome that significant barrier to their development. So just a question mark where you're analysing this, can we clarify what is happening in children's services, the families they're dealing with, and is more work needed to be commissioned or provided in-house, doesn't really matter, but is more work needed to make sure that the children who are in those families receive appropriate service. And then the other thing, we haven't really mentioned white ribbon, but the last council meeting we agreed to be a white ribbon of policy. So where does that fold into all of this? Who's leading on that as an officer? Where is that going? And how does that relate to the strategy or anything else? Because, you know, what was the point of doing that if it's not relevant to this agenda?
Just to pick up on the white ribbon, so absolutely, and I meant to talk about it earlier, sorry, I had it down on my notes. So I'm actually in the process of recruiting a dedicated domestic abuse worker or officer within the local authority, and part of their responsibility will be to lead on the white ribbon accreditation. So that is absolutely top priority for us, where we know about that.
Okay, so if we take both of those as, can we get an update on how children's services are involved, and then the work around the white ribbon accreditation as it progresses? Are we happy we've covered everything? Well, can I say to everybody that's attended for that, in terms of officers, thank you very much. That was a pretty detailed briefing that is, and I'm hoping that members have got something out of that, and obviously we will forward the recommendations that we make as a committee, and I think at some point we will report these back to Cabinet as well to raise their awareness.
I was just going to suggest that, Chair, actually. I think this one's perhaps drafting a quick page for you to present to the next available meeting Cabinet, just give an update on this.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take this back to Cabinet then. So, thank you very much. Thank you. You can feel free to leave the meeting now if you need to move on to other things. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll give you a minute.
Okay, in that case, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is rural and community transport. And we've got James Willett to come and speak to us about this. So, James, over to yourself.
Would you like me to come to the front?
Yes, yeah, that would be
great. I'll come up front and face my colleague who's just that's useful. That's usually what happens. Can you hear me? Is that okay? So, thank you, Chair. The last time we came to scrutiny, we talked about the bus service improvement plan that the council would be submitting for funding for bus services following the national bus strategy guidance that came out in March. And we talked about that process, and we took you through some of the feedback from the survey, and based on the original vision we had, and how we were going to prioritise and use that survey to prioritise our asks from the Department for Transport for bus service support. So I think part of the agenda today and the attachments is the survey and the bus service improvement plan that we talked about. We talked about transport improving in rural areas, in the more urban areas of Shropshire, and what people were asking us to do. So if that's okay now, I just wanted to inform you of the three elements of our submission, which will, to clarify, go on the 31st of October. So we had a really tight deadline with the Department for Transport, but nevertheless we've put an enormous amount of work into this with local consultations, but also building on what people have been asking us, and members have been asking us, and local residents have been asking us for a number of years. So the three phases we split this into is, the first one is recovery. And the recovery element is to ask the DfT, Department for Transport, to continue to support our bus operators as we transition through the pandemic. So right at this moment in time, the Department for Transport supports our local bus operators with the difference between the actual fares they're taking today compared to the fares they were taking pre-pandemic. So nationally, bus patronage has probably recovered to around about 75%. Shropshire, in most rural areas, will be a little bit behind that, so around about probably 65%. So we're asking for the first 3 years, at least, of this bus service improvement plan, is for the monies that they're giving to us at the moment to continue that state support through to seeing that recovery to 100% of what it was pre-pandemic. So that's a continuation of what the Department for Transport have done already, and that includes fare support for the ongoing concessionary fares that operators take for those people who have eligible bus passes. So that's almost the foundation of our bid. That's to say, before we start doing the innovative bit, put my teeth back in, we've got to have those bus services, they've got to be there, the operators have got to be there, and we've got to have something that to build upon. And the second phase is what we're calling levelling up. It's almost the fare funding element. So it's what would we expect passengers to see in a rural area of Shropshire, comparing it to our perhaps more urban areas in our locality. What would we expect to see? So members of the public have said to us what we'd like to see really is we'd like to see better frequencies. So we want to see better frequencies on those core services and on those town services. In addition to that, we actually want to see services. So there's some areas where we haven't got any services at all. So a solution might not be there putting a big bus in, but it might be putting in something demand responsive, so there's something that's flexible. We're going to the more rural areas, our hamlets and the smaller villages, to take people to those essential areas to help with obviously the matter of social isolation and access to services. They want to see longer bus operating hours. So that was a basic principle. So rather than everything finishing at 5:30, there's something there at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock for people, and then it's like we also have to consider and take into account the nighttime economy of our towns. That would help support that as well. Sundays have come up quite a lot, as members will probably appreciate. We had a Sunday services many years ago. We've had some for a long time. So these are things, when you enter to an urban area, you'd expect to see them as a basic, isn't it? It's Monday to Sunday, reasonable frequencies, and actually a bus service. So it's building up from those foundations to what we think that through our survey that passengers want to see. Some bus priority, so it's more likely to be priority signalling to allow buses to have a priority over other types of vehicles. More affordable fares actually came absolutely significantly through the consultation. And real-time passenger information. So when you're standing at our hubs, or maybe a park and ride, or it's a bus station in town, actually it's the proper real time. So it's actually not predictive. It's actually based on the technology on the bus when that bus service is coming. So it's almost that proof of concept for passengers that they can start to be confident when the bus is there. It might be running 2 or 3 minutes late, there's traffic, but it's coming, rather than you've got a paper timetable that says it will be here at the scheduled time. But it was a little bit unknown as to why it's not there. We started off with the foundations, which is what I call recovery, and the levelling up, which is what is the minimum we should expect. And then we get into the innovative element of it, which we're calling Building Back Better, which is the strategy itself. The national bus strategy was called Bus Back Better. So this is where we're saying to the DfT, this is where we build on those foundations and what the minimum we should expect. And this is the stuff that we can do. We're being ambitious, and we're saying we need funding to do any of these things. And we've had lots of conversations with the Department for Transport and other stakeholders. So we're fairly confident they're listening to what we're saying, but these are the main elements of it. So it's what we call Rural Connect, that we showed you at the last scrutiny meeting, which was to do rural transport. So that's smaller vehicles that connect to our smaller villages, into hubs maybe on our market towns, but also takes people to their nearest perhaps medical practice if that's what they wish to do. So it's not about just getting large buses and putting those in very rural areas. Yes, where they need to be, where they need to be there for the numbers of passengers we may get over the next few years, but also it's about flexible, smaller vehicles that can actually respond to local needs. Then there's such as green buses. So whether that be electric, whether they be big buses or the smaller minibuses, which are now coming through in the market, that they might be electric, or looking to the future and saying about hydrogen. So hydrogen, as we discussed at the last scrutiny meeting, may very well be a solution for rural areas for the larger vehicles that have to travel longer distances. The electric buses absolutely working on towns, so such as Ludlow and Osprey, they will work there. They will work in Shrewsbury, they will trial them. I know Reeve will trial them in Osprey, so they will work there. The little question is about how they work on those big inter-urban routes. So choose a service between Whitchurch and Shrewsbury, or Clearbury and Ludlow, those sort of routes. You've got to be looking at something perhaps that's either hydrogen or perhaps even in the intervening period a hybrid vehicle. So something that reduces emissions significantly from the buses you've got there today. So it's actually a transition, but that's a huge ask, and I think most local authorities in the country are asking for significant sums for green buses. Those additional services I talked about, those demand responsive, but also additional services that link in with rain. Shrewsbury Connect is in there, so the operational element of Shrewsbury Connect, which is the reimagining of Shrewsbury Park and Ride. Ludlow Park and Ride is in there. We're talking about multi-operator ticketing for the future, where you actually get on one type of vehicle, so it might be a bus, and then you can actually get onto rail without having to buy multiple tickets, so it becomes seamless. Again, in the survey that came out very high at the top was asking us to have a better interface for passengers online and a better online presence. So that's about us creating a website and an app that actually is very interactive to people. Yes, we have to consider people that haven't got that technology, and we will be doing that, but we need to evolve our online presence so that people can actually see those services that are available. I mentioned greater integration with the rail. That's really important because that rail network is already there. And our passenger hub improvements, whether that be looking at the park and ride sites themselves in Shrewsbury or elsewhere indeed, and that includes our bus stops and includes the various bus shelters around the county, and what can we do with those, where do we need them, and how can we make them more appealing for passengers who are waiting, and what sort of information do they need in there. So there's lots of technology out there. The real-time information, yes, absolutely, in our hubs. There's also some really good innovation out there, which is using solar power bus stops, where it's almost in my description looks like a Kindle. So it's a blank white page. You actually go up to it and you press it, and then the bus timetable appears. So it's not taking electric, it's not having to be wired in the mains, it's using solar power, and actually it's there to be used when you press it, and then it comes up in the, as I say, it's probably a terrible description, but the version of like a Kindle. Don't worry, we're not proposing to put Kindles on all our bus stops, if anybody interprets that, I promise. So that funding submission is very ambitious, but it's also practical. These are the things that we understand that passengers and non-passengers, because that's just as important. So we've got passengers that we've talked to and say, this is what we want you to do to improve our services, but also through that survey and through other discussions, talking to those people that don't use buses at the moment. So what are those levers to change that the industry has talked about for years? And those levers to change are all included in those three categories. So yeah, the recovery, levelling up, what I called it, and then the building back better. Those are all in there. So if we get funding for those, they really start to create an environment where public transport becomes a real option for people in rural communities. So, and part of our bid is to make the point that this is where the funding should go. It should go to our rural communities. It should go to those rural authorities. Whereas perhaps in our urban areas, the large ones, the metropolitan areas, some of that innovation they're looking for is perhaps going for a bus from 8 minutes to 6 minutes. Throughout the survey, lots of comments, people saying, that's great, we're just looking for a bus. So in Shropshire, that's the difference. With that funding, it can be truly transformational if we get our fair share of it, and that's what we've been endeavouring to put the case for the Department for Transport over the many months that we've been doing it. And as soon as we finalise it, of course, we can share that with everybody. We've got an update on the survey to send you, because I think the one that's in here was I presented last time. It hasn't closed. It has closed. It closed at 2,555 responses. So we were blown away with that. That was fantastic. And that was a considerable amount of time people put into that. So I think the average time to complete it was 14 minutes. So you add up how much effort and time that took in from everybody to do it. You know, that's great information to pass on to the Department for Transport. This isn't officers sitting in a darkened room coming up with a plan and we're just submitting it. I had to think of the ideas to start with. That was built on what everyone's been saying to us for years. Then we go out to the public and say, please can you help us prioritise this, what's important to you. So we think we've done that. Lots of work to do. The funding, hopefully, we'll find out early December. We are going for 100% funding on these. That's the key, and the case we've been making for the Department of Transport for some time. This is the case that our rural bus operators can suddenly fund an electric bus or a hydrogen bus from fares which are depressed at the moment. This is, we're different. We need that support now. We think we can transition it in 5 to 10 years. We can make those services more commercially viable, and then for the future vehicles that come along, the replacements, then the fare box on the buses might very well be able to pay for that. But what we need now is that support to get us across the line, to get us into that sort of environment in the next 5 to 10 years. So hopefully that gives you an update of where we were. 31st of October is the big deadline, and of course stay happy to provide further updates as we go through, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll open it up to members to see if we've got any questions. We've had the member briefing, obviously you've updated us on the survey. Is there anything members want to raise? Okay, Barry.
I'm so crabs. But you don't have to about Ludlow. The main things are that parts of Ludlow that just haven't done for us. Especially where the older people are on the caravan side, the other side, down from the castle. It kills me to go over Wheatcliff and take my dog and go up that hill. It absolutely kills me. How they do it every day, I don't know. I've got 98-year-olds going up that hill. It's just ridiculous that they don't have any transport at all. And the rest of the transport is going round. I've said this to you before. It's going round and following them. It's just ridiculous. I don't know who sorted that out. We need electric buses drastically. I have just come in contact with the community bus because my 98-year-old has no way to get in and out because they've now the Methodist Church decided that they're not going to go and get people's food anymore. They haven't got the to do it because they're doing other things now. So the community bus is really ideal for people Wednesdays and Fridays. But I could use some information. I haven't got any information about it at all. I'd go and ring up and get the number from the Methodist Church. I think everything that you're doing is fantastic. I talked to Lgbt about it yesterday, and I was sat for nearly 2 hours because with me being the councillor, I let everybody else go in front of me. And the biggest majority were about joint services with the trains, making sure that it all works right, trying to get taxi drivers to do more because everything finishes at 5:30. We can't get taxis to go out. I think we've got one company that's doing it. And she was astounded when I said we can't get taxis in the evenings, and we can't get them on a Sunday either. So, it's just a case of we wouldn't have so many cars going around Ludlow trying to get on those narrow streets if we had more electric buses and something like that. Yeah. So thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you, and I think just to feedback a little bit there to Councillor Parry is that yeah, absolutely, electric buses work in our towns. The coordination of bus services since 1985 has been a split where operators can commercially register services without consultation with the local authority, so that they can do that. And we as a local authority tend to have always historically picked up those services where operators didn't think they could make a profit, but they fell in that bracket where we felt it was socially necessary. Funding, we do more of those socially necessary services. We have signed up to an enhanced partnership with our operators, which was a fundamental element of you had to do this to get into the bidding process, and that was signed in June with our operators to say we are all in it to improve services. Also, we need the funding, that's the first thing, but we also want to do better communication, etc. There is a further stage after that. If that doesn't work, but we're really hopeful it does because the operators are engaged with us, which is the word you've heard, probably franchising. So there is a further stage, but the Department of Transport very much want us to work collaboratively together to make it work. If it doesn't work, there is still somewhere we could go. So if we ended up with some disjointed elements, that is where we could go eventually. And absolutely what you said about Ludlow and all our other market towns and the rural areas is that's what's coming through the survey. We need some more services. Don't necessarily need to see the big buses. We need some more services. We want to get out, want to go to the shops, want to go out socially. That nighttime economy, we all feel it. You can get the bus in at 7:30 in the morning, have a 5 stops. So, you know, people want to move around, especially as we're coming through this last dreadful last 18 months, that people are going out more and want to do things differently, and life's different. So people's travel habits are a little bit different. So hopefully this gives that platform for us to have something quite different in the future.
Thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions. 2,500 sounds like a massive response. What would you normally expect to get on a response like that? And how much weight does that give you with the DFT when you're talking to them? You know, if you say you've got 200 as opposed to the 2,500 you've got, what more does that give for you? And then secondly, I've got a question around information on bus services in rural areas. So, you know, if bus services are cancelled, if the driver hasn't turned in, as happened recently on the 546 bus service for all the batch, very often people find it difficult to find out, you know, what has happened. People hang around and wait for the bus, maybe it's late. You know, is there funding around to help sort of more real-time information in bus shelters, you know, where there are bus shelters in rural areas, so that people have that real-time information? Very often apps don't work, mobile phones don't work, that, you know, that sort of thing. So I wondered if you can address that as well, please.
So we've got to do the second one first, if that's okay. Yeah, I think that's part of the partnership agreement with the operators, to say operators and ourselves, we can do better at providing that information to people about when searches don't run. The technology is now there. As you said, the apps can be helpful, but real-time information, yes, absolutely, in those bus stops, in those key hubs where it works. But also there is the technology now that is sitting on those buses, you know, almost like the trackers you get in cars and vehicles. They provide that feedback to the software. So we're in discussions with the software provider for a website, and that information can be displayed on there. So actually, you can go on the website and find out where your bus is. So very much like you see in the tracking system. So, you know, you can be, say, coming into the match, and before you leave your house, you can check if he's actually on his way. And so the student has their shoes, say, for example, or say you're in Clee Hill, you can check if it's left Ludlow. So you know actually it's underway and there hasn't been a problem there. The survey question that you asked at the beginning, absolutely that'll carry a lot of weight. I was thinking a survey, I was expecting late hundreds, to be honest, on what we've had before, so that completely blew us away. It really did. And the effort and time people put in blew us away, because it wasn't a short survey, it was 14 minutes on average, so it took some people longer than that. And the Department of Transport expected us to get some feedback from people, but they didn't expect necessarily that amount of information that we can provide them. So that's very much the crux of what we're saying, is that had some initial ideas from things we've talked about for many years, went out to the public, asked them to prioritise it. This is the priority with the DFT. This is what people want. And when you look at the National Bus Strategy, that is the golden thread through it. This isn't for operators, it isn't for the local authority, this is to be built for what passengers wanted, and that's what we're going back to them with. So we're hoping that, well, we feel very strongly that that will resonate with them.
Check, I just have one follow-up question. Do you have an idea, and, you know, apologies, I haven't dissected what's been sent already, all that, you know, I've read through it. Do you have an idea of the response rate, you know, how many people responded from rural areas versus sort of town areas? Who's more interested in this whole survey? Sure.
So the updated summary has got a heat map on it, so where respondents come from. It's pretty evenly spread. To be honest, we'd expect more from the villages and the towns, but it is pretty evenly spread. So there wasn't, we felt, looking at it, that's the surprising point. Was that it was evenly spread throughout the county. It wasn't, say, all respondents from an urban area like Tewkesbury, or more urban area like Tewkesbury, and not from the rural areas. It was pretty much lots of respondents from Bishopsgate, for example, Ludlow and Oswestry. So it was pretty fair, but I think what we'll do is we'll sort of forward that onto you so you can have a look at it. I think it's a little bit more user-friendly than the last one we did, and it breaks it down into all the different categories. So the age groups, the sort of demographics, but also the areas. So hopefully that will be something that will be useful to members to see. Yeah, I think the surprise was it was widespread, a lot of respondees, and the amount of time, and also some of the free text fields that people put in. So there's a lot of people putting in their additional comments, which is the one I always go back to, which made me smile. when we were talking about electric buses, absolutely, we're going to that, and that's going to be multi-million pounds we're asking for. We had a number of people, especially in rural areas, that said, having an electric flying bus, so obviously, is all very good, well and good, we just want a bus. So, you know, there's a few people that said that got together, but I thought I found that quite amusing, but that reflects on what we're saying. We want that technology, absolutely, 100%, but also we just want we want the facility to get people to where we need to get to in the first place.
I did push my parish councils quite hard to sell the idea, so I just want to check their homework.
Yeah, that was all good. Yeah, that all came through. I think all the members could be confident that there's lots of people from all their areas that came back to us, and we're very grateful. So it'll mean a lot, I think, when we go to the deal.
Okay, coming to Nick Hagan next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. There's lots of graphs and pie charts to analyse and try and work out the information that's in them. I think there's no doubt that technology is going to drive absolutely everything that we do. The pandemic and lockdown has certainly pushed that on, and admittedly some of us are being dragged kicking and screaming into this new technological age, but we're doing our best. We're going to need buses with Wi-Fi and USB charging points and all that sort of thing, as it says in one of the graphs, so that's a certainty as we move forward. Just one point I would like to make, and I can't really speak much about the towns and that in Shropshire where larger buses are needed, but myself living in a rural area which does have a bus route, although the roads either side of it have limited bus routes, but on the A488 we've got a good bus route. But one thing I do notice as I live on the A488 at my retail shop is that there's far too many large buses going past with just 4 or 5 people on them, and I think as we move forward we need to accept that in rural areas we need smaller, more frequent service of minibuses. I mean, 12, 14 seats would be quite suitable most of the time. I'm sure these smaller minibuses type thing wouldn't be cheaper to buy, probably cheaper to run as we move towards electric anyway. But there is a certainty that we don't need these big, large buses going up and down our country roads, and the A488 is narrow in places, and I'm sure on some of the hilly areas of that, it would be much more suitable to have smaller vehicles, but more frequent if possible. That's one of the major points that I think I seem to pick up from this report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Is there anybody else wants to add anything?
Can I just put in the local town council that talk themselves into giving us a new stop every year now, next 4 or 5 years. So we've got 2, which is the station. New reason is to get to know we've got another 2 whatever.
I suppose that was a point I wanted to pick up from my area. Is one, I've had a couple of people approach me about the fact that services will be every hour. Yeah. So if the bus doesn't come, taking Dan's point, somebody could be stuck there for 2 hours potentially, and so on. That's obviously the concern around the elderly and in certain conditions and so on. But I was going to pick up on Viv's point of a lot of the bus shelters and the bus stops and so on are provided by towns and parishes. Is there any advice we could be giving to them at this moment, sort of in terms of like the bus shelters and so on? Is there any sort of design that is pretty future-proofed in terms of what we're going to be looking for if they are going to pay towards them? Yeah, making sure that those sort of things exist.
Yeah, I think the shelters themselves, Chair, we've put in obviously funding for them. I think we've got that stage then, once we know we've got that, to talk to the local parishes and the town councils about what would be particularly right for them. But there is absolutely a type of bus shelter that are not easy to maintain, that is easier to put the real-time information in, and those that will actually support the solar power that we were talking about. So that a lot of that information, especially in more rural areas where it's not easy to put in, the mains electricity to cable them, but actually if they can run on solar, that's fantastic. And lots of hubs in major cities now are actually an accumulation of bus shelters rather than one big building. So we'll certainly be able to talk to them and give them advice. But probably the comment from us right now is we're doing that work, we're doing that legwork to understand what would be the best fit. Is there a generic shelter out there that would most suit, say, solar technology and real-time technology, but also that information about the bus stop itself. So where there isn't a shelter, you don't necessarily need a shelter in the local community, is how do we get that bus information out to those people that haven't necessarily got the technology to their fingertips or hands? have access to technology, so that as we transition that to that more and more, and that's where my probably terrible example of the Kindle bus timetable was what I was talking about. And just picking up, Chair, the comments about electric buses, just so we all know, absolutely about the big buses, the restrictions, others. There are different sizes. We currently have an electric minibus at the fleet that is working, doing school and adult services work. We're testing it. We haven't put it out there that we're doing it because we want to make sure it works, but it works really, really well. That is the sort of vehicle that could be a 16-seater that works around those local communities and does the shorter journeys because it'll have the capacity with the battery to do that. So there's that technology can be changing almost every week.
Okay. Duncan?
Yeah, and very exciting stuff, and thanks for coming along and making us aware of this. I think it's a good time for Shropshire and about time at the Red Air Source in buses, because I think going forward it's obviously a means of transport which is very, very important to the county. A slight reservation is regarding the maintenance of the assets we've already got, and particularly I'm thinking about Oswestry bus station, Oswestry second town in Shropshire, because Shropshire Council maintains the bus station. But it's an appalling environment. The last time I went there, the timetable was about 5 years out of date. They're not just mildly out of date, they're significantly out of date. The panels are broken, it still just feels very unkempt. If you're waiting to catch a bus there, you feel the low of the low. You don't feel you're part of the future, you're thinking you're part of the past. It looks a different lead to the Gabonian train station even. So, and it's not much point getting new bus facilities and a new bus station if we can't maintain the ones we've got. So a real plea, can we actually make sure that the infrastructure we've already got is good, fit for purpose, then we can inspire people about what can be to can't be, because you can't maintain what is quite a limited service, shall I say, and people entitled to ask and say, well, it's all just a piping. You'll never be able to maintain this, even if you get the funding for it, and I find that difficult to refuse. So I have raised this in the past, but a real plea to sort out. And it's not the bus station itself in a bad place, or it's not the actual design of the bus station is the problem, it's just a lack of TLC, it's just a lack of anybody on the ground actually updating the timetable, cleaning up, replacing the broken panels, and just making it appropriate.
Is you okay to respond, Jen? Yeah, I think that's a fair comment about the infrastructure. Part of the plan here is, and you'll see with the document, is get that mode of shift. Those levers change. It's got to be the environment you're in as well. So, the buses are great, electric buses, the fleet is great, affordable fares, great, but also where you are, you feel comfortable and happy. So as part of our funding ask for any infrastructure as well, it will be actually to maintain it and to make sure that infrastructure is there for a number of years. And when you said, Chair, about is there a generic infrastructure, some of that infrastructure is a lot easier to clean than others. So some of them always have those self-cleaning, not that those quite work, but self-cleaning windows that they'll try and sell you in the conservatory, but they are better than perhaps the ones we had in the early days. I think when it comes to passenger information, the future's got to be real time in a lot of ways, and that information is a lot easier to maintain. So it's not people me popping out in a van, not that I would do self fall off the ladder, to go and change the bus timetable. That's real time information that we can change remotely, and we can have it updated straight away. I think that's where we need to be.
Okay. I think my only final point was, could you just remind me of the timetable on the bid and so on?
Certainly. Yes, Chair. So the bid has to be in. So it's the 31st, I think, of October. That falls on Sunday, so it will be a week on Friday that the bid goes in, and then we are told that by very early December we should have an indicative understanding of how much we will get.
Sorry, just to be one of the things that doesn't work at Oswestry bus station is the electronic information boards, which were put in, I'm told, years ago, and don't seem to have ever worked. So it's just about instilling confidence. If we can't maintain that level, people struggle to think we'll be able to maintain a much more sophisticated Kindles in every bus stop. So let's maintain what we've got to inspire confidence.
Okay. Just taking your point, I think book lovers would love to have a Kindle bus stop, so make it a subscription. Sorry. So that's fine. So just again, trying to pick up on the points, I think the sort of I've got committee notes, the results and volume of response of the public survey. It is encouraged and supportive of the bid to the Department of Transport. Looks forward to receiving further updates on the progress of the bid. Does that feel like the stage we're at? And since we've got more, we can bring it back to committee? Absolutely. Okay. Right, the next item on the agenda is the future work programme, and I'll hand over to Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb here, Overview Scrutiny Officer. Your next meeting is scheduled in just a few weeks, actually, on the 24th of November. At the moment, there's just a single item for this agenda, which is Shropshire Council's response to flooding, with particular focus on community support. This committee looked at flooding a couple of years ago following the extensive flooding 2018-19 and to a lesser extent 1920. And the officers were fairly candid in the way in which the extreme flooding had exposed some of the weaknesses in their strategies, particularly around community information, around routing roads safely and in business support. It strengthened a lot of this for the 2019-20 flooding season, and we were due to look at this again then, but then obviously the pandemic hit, and this all kind of was put on there in the freezing, as it were. So I think this is an opportunity to look at those impacts again. The idea was to look at those rather than the larger scale infrastructure projects that are mooted and planned going forward to deliver some of the major flood alleviation. This is very much around community support. To help you with that, there's a briefing session planned for the 9th of November in the same manner as James Willick's presentation, briefing on Bus Back Better. So that's on the 9th of November. I've noted as well that you wanted to bring the domestic abuse strategy back to January. I've just had a little back and forth with Laura Fisher, who says that the strategy actually needs to be in place and agreed by the 5th of January. So if you're going to have any input into the draft strategy, then you'll need to look at that briefly at the next meeting in November. Sorry, this is hot off the press. This is literally just the last few minutes I've been told.
No, I think that's fine. I think from my point of view, probably committees, it's just knowing, yes, when the draft strategy is going to be at a point it's worth looking at.
I've been told that it needs to be drafted by next week, as it has been. So it might well be that's in a sufficient. Either we can bring that to the meeting in November, or we can circulate it outside the meeting and then report something back to the January meeting. Leave that with me, and I'll work out the best way of doing that. So you get to see it, and not using up too much officer time.
Are we happy if it needs to go on the November meeting agenda? Are we happy with that? If we've got something worthwhile, yeah. Okay.
Then there's an item mooted in January as well around working with town and parish councils around delivering local services and new ways of working with town and parish councils. And this is a perennial thing that comes up through other committees as well. An example would be around Winter Place Overview Committee, where there's a lot of concern around communications with town and parish councils and their ability to access funds, to access grit bins, to access salt and so on. And also the context of the Health and Adult Social Care Committee and its review around urgent primary care and the new models by which we can deliver urgent care within remote communities. So there's a lot to go on there if the committee is minded to do that. So that's where we stand at the moment. And obviously I'll leave it to you for any suggestions of other topics that we may need to include going forward.
Thanks, Daniel. I think just for committee members, I'll circulate a proposal for something I've got an idea for that we could perhaps start in the January meeting as well in terms of a future item. But if I circulate that to you, we can consider that at the November meeting and decide if that's something you want to take forward. But again, it's open to members to, if you want to put forward suggestions. I suggest maybe the same thing, if you can jot it down, circulate it, and then we can consider it probably at one of the meetings such as this, the work programme. That's in. So, is everybody happy with the work programme as it stands currently? Those arrangements? Yeah. Okay. Our only final item is to note the date and time of the next meeting, which is scheduled, as we've said, for the 24th of November at 10 AM. But obviously that was, the briefing on the 9th of November was referenced as well. That was I want to attend. What time's the briefing going to be then? 2 o'clock seems the prevailing opinion. Yeah, that's fine, if it's in your plan. Yes, same format as the one. Okay, so it's 2 PM on the 9th of November. Okay, thank you everybody, thanks for your contribution.
Mm-hmm.